Dr. Andy Galpin, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on here today.
I'm excited to be here, man.
Yeah, first time I ever was introduced to your work was about 3 years ago now. Believe it or not, it's been 3 years since you were on the Joe Rogan show, unless you've been on since then. I don't remember.
No, we've had some scheduling conflicts for about a year or so.
I would love to see you back on there because Joe Rogan obviously has a lot of different nutrition experts on there. And I believe, in my opinion, he leans more towards a higher protein, higher fat-based diet, doesn't do as many carbohydrates. That seems to have worked well with him. But a lot of the guests that he's had on has kind of been swayed towards that side. One of the reasons, and I don't have an issue with that in certain times and places. However, for general population, I love that when you went on that show, it was not trying to promote any particular agenda, not trying to promote a particular dogma or a particular book, and just saying, this is actually what the science shows. And yes, you can make your body contort and twist into using these types of fats for energy, but your body does much better using this type for anaerobic and this type for aerobic. So first, I want to thank you for representing a good, healthy nutrition, but I would like to learn more about how you came about your understanding of good whole food nutrition and what is best for every individual.
Yeah, man, I'm ready to tackle whatever stuff you got in your world. So let's roll.
So when we look at general population, I know you work a lot with athletes, and we're looking at good nutrition for the individual. What is the solid balance, the foundation that you'll look at for most individuals before you start to really tweak their protocols?
Yeah, so the way I explain this typically is what I call the 90%. And so that's, of course, a just made up number. But 90% of nutrition protocols are 90% the same. So where we're differing typically is on the fringes. Now, that's, of course, there are exceptions to that when you get really minute. But if you think about it this way, we got 7.5 billion of us or something like that. Yeah, you might be able to find 1 million people who do well eating nothing but raw cauliflower or something. And it looks like, wow, this is really effective, but it's really not, because it's an extremely small percentage of people. So I'm generally, when it comes to like podcasts and education, I'm more interested in saying what's most likely to work for most of you most of the time. Now, if you want to get really fancy and work with a practitioner like yourself, someone that knows what they're doing, and drill down and figure out, hey, you are that 1% who does best on the cauliflower-only diet, that's fine. But when I'm teaching classes, I'm not going to teach to the fringe and then ignore the 90%. It doesn't make sense. So what are some of the components in that 90%? So in my opinion, for most people, caloric balance reigns supreme, right? So whether you're trying to gain muscle, you have to be in a surplus. If you want to lose fat, you have to be in a negative balance. And a lot of people fail to even remotely close to understand what caloric balance means. Doesn't mean you have to count calories on your label or use MyFitnessPal, but in the end of the day, calorie balance has to be accounted for. From there, it is you need to have a diet consisting mostly of fresh whole foods. And whatever mostly means to you, whatever other stuff that is to you, I think we would all agree, and the science is pretty clear on this one, that you want to focus mostly on real whole foods. From there, you need to do things like control liquid calories. And that's not necessarily a scientific principle, but it is, now it's getting to something that is practically applicable. So that tends to be a source of, say, not feeling full, as well as extra calories. And so it tends to hurt number one principle. So that's not one of those first principle things, but again, it's something that's in my 90% because it sneaks up on people a lot. I think you have to have some semblance of quality protein intake. Your balance between fat and carbohydrate is extremely variable. So some people will do fine on 80% fat and 20% carbs, or the inverse, or anywhere in between. I'm not as concerned that we have your carbs to fat balance perfect, especially if you're not an athlete, frankly, because I don't think it matters that much. I really don't. But protein is not the case there. So people just don't do well on very low carbohydrate or the very low protein diets. Now, whether you want to go from like a moderate to extremely high, again, I don't think that matters, but going from moderate to very, very low protein seems to be a pretty clear detriment in just about everybody. So that to me is not one that's super negotiable. I think you need to have a balance of colors. Again, whatever that balance means to you, but you need to have an array. You want to avoid eating only brown food, basically, right? Which is the foods that I love the most, right? Like I could live on eggs, meat, and potatoes and ketchup every day, right? But you want to have something with color and a lot of variety. And then you want to make sure that all that is put together in a package that is sustainable, where you feel both slightly restricted, because I believe actually that's what one thing people don't realize is it's important you feel some restriction in your diet, right? But you don't want to have that restriction feel so much where it pushes you in the other direction, right? So you have to have some feeling of happiness and joy towards food, but you also have some like, all right, I can't eat pie for breakfast. Ah, God dang, I really want some ice cream for lunch, but sometimes you say yes, and more often than not, we say no to that. So that's where, and I have plenty more there, but those are some of the things that fall on my 90% when I'm talking to like my mom. She's like, what do I do? Is this true? Is that true? I'm like, all right, here's the deal. Blah, 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 blah. Do those things, and you're probably going to be pretty good for the most part with that.
Yeah, I agree. I want to dive a little bit more into the carbs and protein part, since they're the most popular diets right now. Again, doesn't mean they're right, but the most popular for sure. Still the keto-based diet, still holding strong. And also, one note I'll make on that is that people go in and out of a keto diet, and the diet they're following is not really a ketogenic diet, but we can go a little bit deeper on that if you'd like as well, and the carnivore diet. So the issue that I have, and I think you actually may have touched on it, it is difficult to be on a healthy diet and follow first principles on a carnivore or keto diet because of the colors. So if we know that the phytonutrients in those colors are what prevent a lot of the diseases of the modern world, it can be a challenge to meet those first principles. Can you talk a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a huge meat fan, of course, and I'm a hunter. Like I just got back from Montana in a week. I've been hunting my entire life, right? That's all I know. Having said that, I find the carnivore diet to be one of the least interesting things that's popped up in this space in the last 20 years. I mean, I don't mean to offend you, but I don't understand why people even talk about it. I think it's so boring. It's has such low applicability. I don't even know how many people could do it. You're like, oh, there's so many people doing it. Not really. And even the ones that are leading the charge are now backing off and eating more foods to it. So I don't really know anyone who's sustained that. And I don't know anyone who thinks it's actually something that is generally best practices for most people. There's 1,000 little fringe diets like that I don't see why people are so interested. I feel like if Joe Rogan didn't talk about it every third episode, it would just go away.
Well, that's part of the issue, right? It's that it gets talked about on a big show like that. I agree. There's not a lot of merit to it. However, he will have medical doctors that don't necessarily have training in nutrition or real world nutrition practice talking about all the different benefits.
Even Paul, I think, is backed off now. And now he eats rice and honey and other things. Like he's given up on his own diet.
Really? I didn't know that. Well, that's actually, if he is, that would be really helpful for him to come out and say, here's why. Because I know his lipid levels were off, and, and again, like, it's not my job to speak negatively about other people, but he was leading the charge there. And I find it dangerous. Just like you, I'm trying to help 90% of the people. And that could be quite dangerous. Jordan Peterson and his daughter talking about it. Again, that was for more autoimmune issues and the real true issues with their gut. But they're saying, hey, since I don't eat any carbs, there's nothing fermentable in my diet, so I feel better. Like that's not exactly the best way to get healthy.
I have deep sympathy for people who are like, every day hurts and I just want answers, and I'll spend any amount of money. I'll change my entire life. I'll do whatever the hell it takes to get out of this pain and suffering. I've been on this for 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 years, and no one can give me a fix. And they're so desperate to just not live a life of suffering. I totally get it. So I have no judgment. I'm not, if you want to try it, if you think it's great and it fixed your life, and not only do I not like that, I'm joyous over that. I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. Like, I'm so happy you got your life back, because like it snags my heart, and it takes a breath out of my stomach to think that someone is dealing with things like that. And it's just not in their control. There's nothing you could do about it. So I'm super thankful that I don't have to deal with anything like that. So I feel for those people. So I don't have to think there. And I generally support, I'm not the type of scientist who sits here and is like, well, if it's not in a peer-reviewed, randomized controlled trial, then it's not. I'm not that at all. And so when people talk about the carnivore diet stuff, I'm like, oh, cool, awesome. Like, I'll listen, I'll pay attention. That's really cool. And I'm excited to hear people hearing solutions. But I'm not interested in the folks who are saying that this is an optimal human diet. Mm-hmm. To be honest, after that statement, I'm out.
Right.
Like it just violates too many principles. It fails on every level of logic. It fails on every level of scientific evidence. And so I'm out. Like, I'm not going to give you the time of day because there's too much in my life. I only have so many hours I can spend. I'm not going to give it to somebody. Just the same thing if somebody came along and said, we're all meant to be on the ketogenic diet. Okay, I'm out. Like, you don't understand physiology. You're not being honest. Or again, you're violating and you're twisting every single piece of evidence out there. It fails on teleology. It fails on these different layers of evidence that I can expound on if you want. But so I don't like the extreme things like that if they're being claimed as general solutions. If they're being claimed as like, wow, I'm a weird case, I'm not the normal, and this helped me, then I actually support those things because there are probably hundreds of thousands of people like that where that may actually be a solution. But you need to differentiate those things. And another way to think about this is I'm a huge advocate of people making sure that their confidence in their claims is at the same level as the evidence. Mm-hmm. So if you're like, hey, I don't know, I've had all these problems and I did nothing but drink grape juice all day. I did it for 3 months and I feel amazing. I know the evidence is like 1 out of 10 on this, and I don't know if it'll fix anybody. I'm just letting you know it fixed me. So you're saying I don't have any confidence in this as a global solution. So your confidence is very low, mm-hmm. and the evidence is very low. Fine. The opposite, or the problem here, is when it's like that, and then the statement is, therefore, this is the best thing ever. And then look at all this stuff, and I dug in and I found a paper on the benefits of grapes, and therefore this is the solution for all of us. And now your confidence is greatly exceeding the actual evidence or the merit. So, and that's where people like you and I get irritated with others in the field, because now you're taking advantage of folks who just want to be out of pain. Like, they don't understand the level of the evidence, but we do. And you're being disingenuous and dishonest. So that's where I generally have a problem. And as long as folks avoid that, I don't care. I mean, I'll even support their stuff. I don't really care at all if you're just saying like, hey, we don't know what's going on here. I try this. And if you have these same symptoms, maybe try it. Maybe you feel better. I'm fine with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes down to honesty. I mean, that's really what it's about. And so your average person going on a chat thread and saying, I started to add a half a teaspoon to apple cider vinegar to my water after a single meal, and this, and this happened. Great. You're just saying like, hey, as a one-off, this worked for me. Maybe you want to give it a shot. Seems like it will not have a lot of side effects the other way. So give it a shot. But in my industry, and a lot of my colleagues, I'm not an MD, but a lot of my colleagues are MDs. They don't have a lot of nutrition training. They see the keto diet talked about. They might have tried it themselves. They lost some weight. And then they start recommending it just ad hoc to anybody. That's to me, is dishonest, and they are actually just uninformed about these first principles. So I don't necessarily want to come down on anyone or the ketogenic diet in general, because we use it in a 3-week approach, basically, to a lot of our metabolic reset programs, but then we transition off of it. So what I'd like from your science background is to say, not against anybody, but here's why it won't be the best for you long-term. Like, here are some of the more honest approaches. It works for this, could work great for brain tumors, right? For certain types of cancer. But we also know certain types of cancer, like melanomas, they seem to have an affinity for lipids. So it's like, it's not a one for all. So I'd love to hear some of your takes on it, because my community's always heard from me. I want to know your takes.
Yeah. I actually think people can live just fine on a ketogenic diet the rest of their life. I don't see any reason why that puts you at a significantly greater health risk than a non-ketogenic diet. So at best, I'd say that's probably about a wash. If it fits your practical lifestyle and your approach, and it checks all the other boxes that go beyond physiology, then it's fine. I honestly don't really care if you do it. I think you can be just fine. I think you can be on all these standardized versions of it, these a modified ketogenic or a slightly lower. And it's like, oh, okay. So basically you're just doing like a slightly higher fat, slightly lower carbohydrate, normal diet, but you want to call it keto. Cool. Like, I don't really care. If you're really talking about your textbook definition ketogenic diet, like 80% fat, and the rest of your 20% comes from a combination of, 10 or 15% protein and 5 to 10% carbohydrate. I think you're going to have less people succeed on that than other variations. But if you want to do something more like a modified, where it's 60% fat, a normal amount of protein, and then a 10 to 20% carbohydrate, I actually think people would do fine on that diet. especially given the physical inactivity of most individuals. I don't really care. Like I said earlier, I don't think it matters that much if you're, 10 or 20% of a swing in your carbs versus with fat. Like I just think most people would be totally fine. Where I think you're going to run into some problems with a really, really, really high fat diet is through aging, because we know how critically important sufficient protein ingestion is to mitigate things like muscle loss with aging. And so I don't believe many people would do great on, a protein diet that's half of what we're generally recommending. And that's probably what you're going to have to do to get those 80% numbers, kind of depending on how you work it. So, from a longevity standpoint, I do not believe with any shred of evidence whatsoever suggests that a ketogenic diet will make you live longer and live better. But a lower carbohydrate diet, again, lower than say 60%, so 40% carbs or something, 30% carbs, I think it's fine. You can live optimally like that. I don't think you have to have 50%, especially again, if you're sitting around doing almost nothing physically all day, or maybe you're working out for 90 minutes a week total or something like that. You don't really need that many carbs, but you don't need that much fat either. You just need to eat low calories and you'll be fine.
Calorie restriction is the big part here as well. I think there's a huge difference though between 50% carbs, 40% carbs, or 80% carbs. And you started touching that for sure for protein intake and longevity. We know that as you get older, your protein requirements change for various reasons. One is you become more catabolic. But the other, I would say, and I would just give a little bit of pushback just from clinical practice, it mainly affects women, not as much men. But when I see women start to go lower in carbohydrates, and especially if they are active, I see their thyroid start to go lower and lower.
Yeah.
So,
that's a pretty consistent finding with the science actually as well. We generally don't see women handling lower carbohydrate diets as well as men.
Yep, absolutely. And I would say the older you get as well for women. So we have activity level and then we have age. There's something to do with, I think, the nervous system as well. If you give your body some carbohydrates, you're going to shift more, or I should say out of more of the sympathetic nervous system dominance, which will then less affect cortisol. And if you aren't producing as much cortisol, you're probably going to be able to then produce healthier levels of thyroid hormone, estrogen, progesterone, et cetera. So part of that is clinically based, part of it's just from working in practice. But I think there's probably a happy medium. I mean, I'm not radically against a 40-30-30 diet. I'm not against anywhere near that. I just think that once you go to 70, 80% fat, you're just not left with a lot. You don't have a lot of leeway. And I don't find most people get in 7 to 9 servings of fruits and veggies every day. And so now they're not getting a lot of their phytonutrients, and they're also not getting their natural prebiotics for their gut flora. So then I see the gut become imbalanced. And the biggest thing, which I actually want your take on, is what you called optimized versus adaptive. I find they lose their adaptive capacity. I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well now.
Yeah, so that's a central principle I use consistently, which is trying to identify when you ask a question like what's better, or which one of these is more effective, or whatever you want to do. I can't answer those unless we understand, are you truly trying to optimize or cause adaptation? And what I mean by that is it's akin to short-term versus long-term game, right? We call this short game and the long game, similar to delayed versus immediate gratification. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we take it there and then work backwards, I believe you need to have a balance between immediate and delayed gratification. So someone who always chooses immediate gratification, you're obviously going to have you're going to have long-term consequences, right? So if every day you wake up and you're like, ooh, I want, pizza for lunch, and you do that because it makes you feel better now, and you're like, I don't want to go to work today because I'd rather watch TV all day. Those are all things you're choosing to make you feel better right now. But that's great, but you're going to get fired and fat and blah, blah, blah. That has long-term consequences. So you do many, 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 many things every single day that are not going to make you feel the best at that current moment, but because you know that those will lead to a better life down the road. Yeah. So you're choosing long-term results. So delayed gratification is what that would be, right? Well, we see the opposite is also a problem. If you always choose delayed gratification, you tend to burn out very, very quickly, and you tend to be never present. And so sometimes you have to do what makes you feel good right now, because that's what you're working for. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you're working hard trying to build a business or raise kids or whatever you're doing for 3 or 4 or 5 months, you need to stop thinking about, what's going on next week, the month after, because you're never actually going to stop and enjoy a free Saturday with your kids. Mm-hmm. Or you're never going to stop and enjoy the fact that, hey, it's been 2 years and we have a profitable business. This is fantastic. Let's take a few days to enjoy it. And so we see all kinds of problems. People like that tend to never be parasympathetic. They're always sympathetic. They're fight or flight. They have all kinds of problems because they're choosing delayed gratification too much and never recovery. So with that understanding, optimizing versus adaptation. Are you trying to optimize for the current moment or this week or this month or whatever? Or are you trying to induce adaptations? Right? So the adaptation would be more like delayed gratification, the long-term benefit, and the optimization is the immediate gratification. So if you're trying to say, is a ketogenic diet going to help me lose weight? I'd say, what are you trying to do, optimize or adapt? If you're trying to optimize for this week and you cut out all carbohydrates, I promise you, you will lose 3 to 10 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sometimes that's the goal. So for example, we would use a ketogenic approach for a week or so prior to our athletes making weight for competition, because it's a quick and easy way to lose a bunch of weight. And then we put that weight back on by refeeding carbohydrates, and then they go compete. Right? But that's not our long-term fat loss solution. It's not even close. That's a short-term thing. If you're trying to look good, say for a photo shoot or whatever, short-term thing. Now, the backside of that is, okay, are you trying to cause adaptation? Well, if you're trying to cause adaptation, then you need to do things that's in the short term, right, to cause there. So an example might be, we might actually have an athlete in a competition sport do a ketogenic diet. And what happens when they're doing that is their performance goes way down. They feel terrible. But if we needed to do that to improve their ability to use fat because they're, say, too carbohydrate biased, then the short-term downturn is worth it for the long-term adaptation. So 6, 7, 8 weeks from now, we may actually see greater gains because we spent these first couple of weeks kind of, biting the bullet a little bit. And so that's the whole idea is what are we playing for? Are we trying to get better 6 years from now? Are we trying to fix a problem that, hey, this has been lingering for 2 or 3 years, and I know you don't want to do this, say, elimination diet for 30 days that we're recommending you do to reset your gut health. I know it'll suck for 30 days, but if you do that 6 months from now, we think we'll have a permanently fix your stomach. Whatever the case may be, right? So that's what we have to understand is, are you trying to feel better today? And the part about this is the things that typically make you feel better today almost always cause long-term problems, right? And so you have to balance those things or you run into issues, right? So if you're like, hey, I want to get better at stress management. So in the mornings, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to drink a couple of glasses of water, and then I'm going to journal for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to do a cold shower, and then I'm going to do a 20-minute breathing routine, and then I'm going to make my bed, and yada, yada, yada. And all of a sudden, it's like a 2.5-hour routine. Well, that's fantastic, right? And how long is that going to last?
Right.
Right. Like, well, for most, and if you're 23 and you're an entrepreneur and you have no kids, you could probably do that for forever. But once life hits, you're like, okay, that 2.5 hours, that's got to be compressed into 6 minutes total, right? So I can't optimize my day like that. I have to be able to perform and execute at work without all that daily optimization stuff. So I have to have my best day without my morning breathing routine. I have to have my best day without being able to eat my perfect breakfast, without being able to do a workout in the morning because I woke up and my kid was sick and woke up 2 hours early or whatever. I keep using these kid references because I got 2 little ones, and this is like what I've been dealing with for the last couple of years, right? Okay, all the stuff that I typically need to do to have an optimal day, to have my optimal cognitive function, to feel the best. Okay, well, I have to be able to also perform when that doesn't happen. And so what happens is you lose resiliency, and you have to be very, very, very cognizant of pushing towards sensitivity versus resiliency. So the more sensitive you get on some things, that means you're less resilient. And so it's a similar idea. You want to balance being sensitive versus resilient. And I could go on with examples of that if you want, but that's a general concept.
Well, I mean, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the big things that I see a lot too, and I do my best to help with, is the reference point of hermetic stressors. So you want to be able to stress your body, but not necessarily like somebody else's, because your body may not be ready for that. You work with some elite athletes. They could train 6 hours a day. Some people can't train for 6 minutes. Like they couldn't do 6 minutes of 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off of sprints, or they'd be just totally gassed because their body is just they're not able to handle that. So it's like you have to work to your level, but the goal is to buffer stress. And so for me, 1 day a week of a fast. So it's not every day of doing 16 hours of depletion, whatever it might be, but I can do a 24-hour fast once a week, and I want to eat. There is that restriction. Like my body wants that. It knows that it should be fueling itself. And if there's a day where I don't feel up for it, I don't do it. But my goal is to make myself better under pressure. And now it's even taking it to that next level. Again, just for me personally, is saying, can I work out while fasted? And I'm now to the point where my body's strong enough where I say yes. And there may actually be some mitochondrial benefit from that, where I want to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But I want to stick with nutrition just for a moment. And it's the body's ability to handle both carbs and fat, and I would say protein. Most people do fine at handling protein except for digestion. Like they can handle protein. So we're talking about carbs and fat all the time, essentially. So what I say to people, and you had a great video, and I'm going to link it up actually in the show notes today. The video was something about, you were holding a banana. It's like, does fruit make you fat? And it was only a 4-minute video. And I want more people to watch that because it's 100 calories. I would love for you to share your thoughts on that and why not eating fruit is one of the craziest things. And if you can't eat fruit, like if you literally have a piece of fruit and you gain weight the next day, that is a metabolic issue. Like there is an actual hormonal issue going on in the body if you can't have a piece of fruit. So if you could share that would be great. Let's
go back to that resilience versus sensitivity issue. So let's say you're really concerned about your body's glucose response, and you went out and got a Freestyle Libre and you got a continuous glucose monitor and you plugged it in your arm. Mm-hmm. And you're like, man, every time I even smell a carbohydrate, my blood glucose, which is normally say 80, jumps to 135. And that's generally higher than what we would want it to be, as a response to all feeding. All right. And you're like, oh my gosh. Okay, so you have two choices. You can avoid carbohydrate like the devil. Now, by doing that, are you becoming more sensitive or more resilient towards carbohydrate? You're actually becoming extremely sensitive now, because if you give yourself less and less carbohydrate, in this case, let's say it's a banana, let's say it's fruit in general. Well, by not giving your body that insult, it literally down-regulates the digestive enzymes in your stomach that break down that particular fruit. Whole host of other things. And so you actually become less resilient towards that thing. So you think you're doing something that's better by avoiding that food because it's a bad food for you, when all you've done is actually reduce your body's ability to deal with that insult. Mm. And so the next time you have a little bit of carbohydrate, say instead of one banana, you have a third of a banana, but because you have a tenth of the ability to handle it now, that third of a banana now shoots you back up to 135 or 140. And so all you've done is made yourself incredibly sensitive to carbohydrate. And the only solution to that is to take more carbohydrate away, take more, and take more. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not fixing my problem. I need to go full keto because I just can't handle carbohydrates. No, you can't handle them because you're not used to it at all. It's just like if I said, hey, you worked out yesterday. Yeah. And did you get sore today? Yeah, I was sore maybe 3 out of 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, great. Well, geez, let's not work out again tomorrow and see what happens. Oh, you wake up, I'm only 1 out of 10. Fantastic. Well, I guess the solution to keeping your soreness low is to go to no exercise period. Now, when I say it like that, you're like, well, okay, it's obvious. Right. But why wouldn't the same logic apply to carbohydrate? It does. So you have to actually train, and in the exercise example, what you want to do is keep exercising and start to become more and more resilient to that. Let your body figure out how to deal with that stress. What will happen is after a few days, maybe 2 or 3 workouts alone, now all of a sudden, instead of getting 3 to a 10, now you're back to 1 out of 10 with that exact same workout. Now all of a sudden you can eventually double, triple the amount of work you do and still only get you to a 1 or 2 on that scale. The same thing would be the carbohydrate. So instead, if you start working with that carbohydrate and eating more bananas, what you'll actually see is instead of that going to 135, it may start jumping to 130, 125. It may stay the same. It depends on a lot of factors here. But theoretically, it may actually start going down if you're not used to having that banana, because your body will learn to handle it and digest it well. Processes. So some things you want to drive towards sensitivity. For example, alcohol, right? If you're like, man, I get hungover after 3 beers. That's not the worst thing ever, right? Now, if you're like, man, I stopped drinking entirely, and now I had 1 beer last night and I feel kind of crappy today. yeah, you've gotten really, really sensitive to it because you haven't been exposing your body to it. It's downregulated the alcohol dehydrogenase, and now you feel the effects of one beer. And you may think to yourself, okay, is that good or bad? Well, I don't know. If you want to live a lifestyle where you can't have one alcoholic drink without feeling hungover the next day, fine. But for me personally, I'm actually like, I make sure I drink alcohol somewhat regularly, like once or twice a month, because I like it. And if I don't, I feel terrible after one cocktail, one beer, one glass of wine. And so I want to make sure I'm like, oh, let's get one thing in. And if I do that, then I can usually have, a couple of drinks every once in a while, and I won't feel super terrible the next day. But you don't want to go so far in that other direction where you're so resilient to alcohol, you can have 15 shots a night and wake up the next day feeling fine. You would definitely be an alcoholic if that's the case, right?
Or in college, yes.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Like, you have to think about, okay, this is how I feel after eating this fruit or whatever. Now, what do I want to do about it? Do I want to get better at dealing with fruit because I think it's generally a food I like, it's a healthy food and has all these other benefits? Mm-hmm. Or do I want to eliminate it completely? Well, I am typically going to say develop resiliency. I believe almost always resiliency is better to drive than sensitivity, especially if it's something that you want to be a part of your lifestyle. So if we go back to kind of the video you're talking about, people tend to get, and I've never really understood why people are so scared of fruit. I know it's all quote unquote sugar.
It's sugar, right?
But it's not the same type of sugar that you think it is. And number two, it turns out we've been eating carbohydrates and we've been eating fruit for a long time. And we have plenty of things in our system that are developed specifically to handle that. If you look at the research, it's extremely clear. People that eat high amounts of whole, fresh fruits tend to actually be lower in weight, right? So it's not something that drives weight gain. That is a complete farce. We've never seen that in literature ever. We've never seen whole, real fruit consumption causing obesity. I've been known to say this pretty often over the last 10 years. Like, I've never heard or seen a single person who ever got obese because they ate too much fresh fruit. Mm-hmm. That's never happened in human history. Fruit juice, maybe. Fruit snacks, sure, maybe. Fructose in general, because you're adding, processed foods, okay, sure, maybe. But no one who ate an orange and an apple a day ever got obese. Like, that's just not what happens. And because of things like, you have to look at the absolute amounts, right? So like, I know that a banana is quote unquote all carbs, but it's like 25 grams of carbohydrate. And if you're trying to keep your total daily carbohydrate intake to 25 grams, well, geez, a banana looks like it's, like that's a whole day's worth. Mm-hmm. But most people are on like 300 or 400 grams of carbs a day. And so you're talking about 100 calories, right? 100 calories. I promise 99.9% of you don't know what you're eating on a daily basis within 100 calories, plus or minus. Not even if you're using MyFitnessPal, I promise you're not within 100 calories. You think you're eating 1,800 calories a day, plus or minus probably 200 or 300, maybe more, not 100. So 100 calories is the number you're not even going to get within anyways. It's not that big a deal, right? If you're eating 4 or 5 bananas a day, sure, but 400 calories of a banana, it's the equivalent of eating like, an avocado. It's like, or, like a tablespoon of peanut butter for that matter. Mm-hmm. So there you go. It's like, yeah, you could have 3 bananas or that tablespoon of peanut butter and your calories would be about the same. So that's what I mean. Like, you have to think about it in context. And I get very irritated, as I'm sure you do, with people who try to fearmonger against fruit. You're like, oh my gosh, apples are all carbs. And, apples, when we were a hunter-gatherer, were like half the size. Okay, yeah, so they used to be 75 calories. Now they're 120. This is 40 calories, friends. And if we were hunter-gatherer, we would probably eat 12 of them instead of 1.
Right.
Like, these are not real numbers. This is not, like an extra 5. They used to be 25 calories. Now they're 500 calories. Okay, that's a big difference here. But we're talking about such unbelievably small numbers that this doesn't matter. This is not causing the health epidemic. This is maybe the difference between somebody who's trying to drop from 7% body fat to 6%. Okay, maybe that stuff matters. But for the rest of us, this is not what's 90% of people's 90% of problems. So I blow past it. I'm like, whatever. Like, this is not something I'm worried about. With our professional athletes, again, we'll dial that in, but because they're trying to lose huge amounts of weight in a very small fashion. And so we just have to take food away, period.
Right.
So yeah, we'll start to back up, but they're even eating carbohydrates, especially fruit, up until the very, very last days. So It's not something we generally pull from people ever.
And for anybody that's active, metabolically active, they have a job where they're moving around, or they're even getting 10,000 steps a day. Talk a little bit about, your liver is storing 90 to 100, 120 grams of glucose or glycogen essentially per day, and your muscles are storing 3-4 times the amount of it. So by you even eating fruit and carbs, well, you're just replenishing for the first, let's say, 100 or so grams per day for most people. Can you talk a little bit about the science behind that, and why, if you are moving your body and exercising, you probably want to have 1 or 2 fruits a day?
Yeah, so this is the specific. There's different types of carbohydrates, right? So we can kind of split carbohydrate globally into 3 parts. So starch, sugar, and fiber, right? So sugar is made up of a whole bunch of things, but in this particular case, you've got the monosaccharide. So the most basic component of sugar being either fructose or glucose, right? And what we care about now. Now, another thing that people fearmonger with fruit is they say, well, fruit is made mostly of fructose, and fructose has to be digested and processed in the liver. And then its primary endpoint from there is to be turned into fat. Therefore, when I eat fructose, it gets stored all as fat. Mm-hmm. And that's just a strong manipulation, a gross, poor explanation of metabolism. So part of that's true, but the second part is a lie. So, for example, if you are in a negative caloric balance, eating fruit will not magically make you fat because calories are negative, right? So it doesn't really matter that the fructose is going to be processed in the liver and then turned into fat, because what's going to happen is any of the glycogen that you use in your muscle, or in your liver for that matter, will be restored first. Mm-hmm. And so if you have, like you said, 400 grams of carbohydrates in general stored in your muscle and another 100 in your liver, and your daily turnover is 100, well, you've got at least 100 to work with just to maintain where you're at in your muscle. And you're not going to preferentially take carbohydrates and store them as fat if your body needs to restore its own carbohydrates. That doesn't make any sense. Like, it would basically say, we have carbs, we need to replace carbs, let's go there first. If there's overflow, now what will happen is we'll down-regulate fat burning, right? And so you'll stop burning as much fat. But if you're not in a caloric surplus, then that doesn't happen. So you have nothing to worry about. In addition, your liver functions as your backup supply to keep blood glucose levels. So you've all heard of blood sugar levels, right? If your blood sugar gets low, you start to feel poor. And that's because the brain uses blood glucose as one of its primary, not its only, but one of its primary fuel sources. And so it likes to maintain a few things in your body like pH, blood pressure, and blood glucose pretty much at all costs. So if you start to exercise and you start to burn the sugar in your muscle and it starts to get low, it'll start taking it from the blood. But then the blood glucose gets low. Well, the easy way to keep that standardized is to then take the glucose, and I'm using the wrong terms intentionally here just to make it simple for listeners.
That's right.
It'll take the glucose in your liver, put it in your blood so the blood actually stays the same, right? Because again, you want to maintain that number. And if you go up and down in the amount of carbs in your muscle and your liver, it doesn't really care as much. It doesn't want the numbers in your blood glucose or the numbers in your blood fluctuating. So let's say you did that and you stopped your workout or stopped whatever you're doing. And now the level of carbohydrates in your muscle and your liver is a little bit lower. Well, if you eat that piece of fruit, the first thing it's going to do is go to the liver, like you said, fructose does, and it's going to replenish the amount of fructose in your liver. Not fat if it's reduced. It's only going to contribute to fat if you're in a total caloric surplus. Mm-hmm. So you have nothing to worry about. And then again, there on top of that, you're talking about a few grams, like 5-10 grams. This is so negligible. It's ridiculous. So compared to one bad meal on the weekend, you could bring in an extra 300 or 400 grams. So the extra 5 or 10 grams you got during the week every day, it's going to pale in comparison to 2 or 3 bad meals, like one night out of nachos and 4 beers. That's a wrap, son. Like, it's not even close to what you had in the fruit. So the numbers are just not very relevant with fruit unless you're eating absurdly high amounts.
Which happens to no one, unless you're juicing all of your apples and oranges, which can be an issue, just juicing all of your fruit instead of just juicing veggies. People can go overboard. But again, if you're doing that much fresh juice, you're probably not going astray in a lot of other areas of your diet. You're probably a pretty healthy human being. And I would say too, it's always about fructose. People saying this and that. Fructose, like for example, your example in a banana, 25 grams, 27 grams or so of carbs, 6, 7 of that is fructose. You're not talking about the entire thing. So yes, there's going to be fructose. Exactly. And so that argument too is it's fractional. And we're talking about a banana. If we're talking about, even lower glycemic fruit and berries, it's going to be even less of the fructose, but it really is it's restoring your supply. So a bigger part of this is also moving your body. And I think that you have a lot more adaptive flexibility with your diet if you move your body. And so that's where I want to shift to next is like diet absolutely matters, and you need to be really dialed in if you're sedentary. And even then, you're still not always going to be healthy because the human body was meant to move, it was meant to sweat, all of these specific things. So let's talk more into the exercise field, which is one of your specialties, and talk about I know that we're going to work up to it, but for the average person, for that 90% of people, what's the minimum requirement that they should be doing for both anaerobic, which is like weight training, whether it's body weight or not, and aerobic training? How do you look at that?
Yeah, so I don't break it up like that. I think about it in terms of the insults I believe your body needs to have, say, per week. Now, there's an article I wrote for XPT Life, where I cover all this stuff, and I give a couple of samples that you can go look up. One's like I think 2-day-a-week sample, and one's like a 3 or 4-day-a-week sample or something like that. So
I'll link those up for sure as well. Yeah.
And I think it's XPT Life is the website. But so I think about it this way. It's really important that you do something that requires your body to sustain consistent effort over a decent amount of time. So if you want to call that cardio, I don't care. I don't like that term for a bunch of super nerdy science reasons. This is something that is 30 minutes. Now, if you need to start at 20, fine, but 30 to 45 to 60 minutes of sustained effort. I'm not talking intervals. I'm not talking up and down. You do not take a break for a minimum 30 straight minutes. Like whatever you're doing, swimming, you want to push a sled, you want to run, jumping jacks. I don't really care what you do. Just don't take a break. It's not up and down. There's no rest intervals whatsoever, or no rest at all. You can change the variation, but you never get a stop. Okay. You also then need something that takes you to a maximum heart rate. Okay. If you want to do 30 on, 30 off, I don't really care. If you want to do a minute on, minute off, it doesn't really matter to me. You want to do 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, like a classic 800-meter repeats or 1-mile repeats, cardio, kickboxing, CrossFit class. I don't really care, but the heart needs to touch its maximal or close to maximal capacity once per week or something like that. You need to do something that requires you to move as fast as you can move. So this is maximal speed stuff. Power is close, but something that requires you to move maximal speed. You need to do something that requires your body to move at a maximum force output. And again, when I say maximum, I don't necessarily mean 100%, but maybe 90%, 95%, 70% is not going to cut it, right? 80% probably doesn't cut it. So it's got to be 90% or plus. 95 would be better. So again, this could be a leg press machine. It could be, push-ups, could be, body weight squats. If that really is close to your maximum leg strength, whatever the heck you want it to be. Again, push a sled, drag a car, I don't really care. And then finally, something that drives and stimulates muscle growth. And so this is something that is closer in that, like, say 40% to 85% of your maximal strength range, but you repeat it for, say, 5 to 25 repetitions, okay? And you get most of your muscle groups involved in that. So those don't have to be separate workouts. They don't necessarily have to be, quote unquote, every week. It could be every 2 weeks you do something like that. You could combine a lot of those together. So you could do maximal speed stuff and then take that to fatigue and get your heart rate up. You could do a speed work and then do your cardio after that. All kinds of combinations of these things. So again, that's in the samples I wrote, like how to combine those into into a couple of sample weeks, again, based on whether you had 3 days to work out or 4 days or something. I can't remember exactly, but so that's what I tell people to get after. Is you have to have insults in all of those areas. If you do that, you're going to be in a very, very good spot from an exercise perspective.
I completely agree. I just think the language a lot of people are using is probably different, or I might be using when I even phrase the question, and I understand why you don't want to use it just as cardio or whatever it might be, because you're probably hitting anaerobic and aerobic thresholds within that. Whether you're doing swimming, it's like, okay, well, in 30 seconds, I was more anaerobic than I was aerobic and switching back and forth. But I get it. I mean, that makes total sense to me. And it can be applied through, just like you said, whether it be swimming or on a bike, whatever it might be. And then there's some form of intervals in there. So who knows the time amount? I'm usually between 20 seconds and I used to be up towards 90 seconds. I just don't think anybody can maintain that for that long all out. I used to run the 800 and that was just a brutal race. I mean, there's nothing worse than sprinting for just a little over 2 minutes, which was my time straight. At the end, there wasn't a second one to be done. That was it. Brutal race. And then we got the max force, we've got the max speed, we've got the muscle growth, some type of 5x5 program, 3x10, like whatever it might be within that. So that makes total sense. My question for you is, how often do we need to do this? Meaning, how long does that workout last? I'm usually no more than 2 days off in a row, but I would love to have you refute that or just think about that.
Yeah. So I would bucket all that in as exercise. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I would make a second bucket for physical activity. Okay. So I think that ideally you're physically active every single day. Realistically, give me 6. If you want to take Sunday off and watch football all day, you'll be right there with me. So that's cool. That's no problem. If you realistically can get 5 in, that's a great start. So if you're like, hey, I can be physically active 5 days a week and I can work out 3 days a week.
Yeah.
That's super realistic and very achievable and still very, very effective. So if you can do that, that would be the goal. More is better. Now, whether you want to exercise 6 days a week, I don't think that's necessary. That's what I like to do, but it's not necessary at all. And arguably it's not even more effective.
Right.
So it's just something that I like doing. So I'm going to do it there, but those are the numbers I'd say.
So that makes, I think, three times a week, 4 times a week, more days than not, right around there. Absolutely doable. Tell me a little bit about what would be physically active. Is it steps per day? Like what would that look like?
Yeah. So I don't use steps per day, but I'm fine if you want to use 10,000, whatever. Those numbers should probably be higher, but it is what it is. So if you compare that to say me versus my wife. So my wife is a preschool special ed teacher, and I'm a college professor. If we work out the same time, the amount of times per week, she will triple me in physical activity throughout the day. Mm-hmm. I'm generally sitting on my computer, maybe standing in class teaching, but she's chasing 3-year-old autistic kids around all day. And it's very high pace. It's very sympathetic. It's really like, it's actually somewhat dangerous because you have to watch these kids at all times because they'll hurt themselves on accident or hurt them. And it's like 8:05, we do this. 8:07, we switch to this center. 8:09, we do that. And it's just like, and I'm like, we start class like 4:15, whatever. Like, it's just not, I can pop on anytime. I can go get, and she's just like, boom, 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 boom.
Right.
So she will eat more calories throughout the day. And obviously she's like, 50 pounds lighter than me, but she still eat more calories a day than I do because her physical activity is extremely high. She doesn't need to come home and go for a walk, like to get her physical activity in, but I need to, I need to do something throughout the day to move because it's not a part of my life. And so that's what I would pay attention to. And hers is not even necessarily steps. It's generally just stress.
Yes.
Yeah. She's got a really physically stressful and mentally stressful job because of the dangers and she's trying so hard to get these kids that are, it's really tough. Where if my kids aren't listening, I just tell them to go home, like get out of my class. So it's a different thing.
Right.
And I'm not in a high pressure situation like she is. So I would take that into account, like how sort of stressful is your day? Because remember, stress is stress. Mm-hmm. So if you're just like, if you're end of the day by 4:00, you're done for every day. Maybe you don't necessarily need to get 10,000 steps. Maybe a 15-minute walk can do it. Now I try to do that and I try to set up as many calls as I can. I always walk when I take calls and I have a lot of calls throughout the day. So I try to do it that way. I have standing desk, of course, try to get up and stand as much as possible. But I have to do more than, I have to go out of my way to move more than she does. So again, without giving you a number, that's what I'd say is pay attention to generally how physically active, inactive, and or stressful your job is throughout the day, and then adjust as needed. And what I can also say is you'll never have problems by doing too much, but you can have problems by doing too little. So hedge one way versus the other.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice for sure. And your body will tell you not to do it, to stay in its comfort zone. But if you're really overdoing it, of course, I mean, you'll know. But I think most people are not in danger of overdoing it.
No, I can give you some little tricks that I don't do, just to be candid with you. But I have friends who do these things. Like I have one friend, he'll set an alarm for I don't know if it's every 45 minutes he does or something, or every hour, maybe once every hour. And he'll go out to the garage and he'll do like, it's something crazy, like 10 sit-ups, 10 push-ups, and 10 squats. And then he goes back to work. I mean, it's like a 20-second routine. Like it's something crazy, like 2 pull-ups or it's something like that. And I have a lot of friends that do different variations of that, where you just every hour you do 5 push-ups, 5 sit-ups, 5 jumping jacks, whatever. You'd be surprised. You multiply that by 6, by 7, like you actually got in 50 squats and 50 push-ups or whatever the number is, and you can get a decent amount of work done. And I know he does that pretty specifically on days that he has his kids or whatever, or he's got to watch him for his wife or something, and he knows like I'm not probably going to get to exercise today. And so he makes sure that he hits that thing. And so again, he'll get 100 body weight squats, 50 push-ups, blah, 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 in throughout the day. And it's pretty good mentally too, to kind of like refresh yourself. So you can do little strategies like that.
Yeah. And like you said, they do add up. I mean, they really do. It's one of those things like, oh, well, does taking the stairs matter? No, taking the stairs one time does not matter at all. But if you do that throughout the course of the day and over a week, yeah, they multiply. I actually bought a little trampoline, a little rebounder for my office, because a lot of I can put my head down for 2 hours, 3 hours and just like, oh, well, what just happened? And then I just see it in there and I just walk over to it and I'm just jumping on that for 60 seconds. And for circulation and just like you said, brain health, like just getting a little bit of oxygen, getting out of that sympathetic nervous system dominance, it goes a long way just to break up your routine. And it can make you a little bit more, I guess, metabolically flexible. You'll burn some calories. So now you can actually eat some of those carbs and other foods that you want.
And it's super effective at regulating blood glucose. It's very, very effective at that. So it'll keep you very stable by peppering that stuff in, and you won't have those ups and downs and crashes.
I read some really interesting research. This is a while back now. It's probably a good decade. Just at not just postprandial, but glucose levels from people that sat versus stood during the day to work. And it was amazing. Like when you sit, your body just says, oh, okay, well, we're in a storage mode, I guess. Like we're just, basically not metabolically active. So we're just going to store. And standing alone, whether it was the act of the gastrocs having to work harder to push the blood back up or not. It was amazing to see that was the one change that they made, the one variable. And I don't know, do you have any more insight on that specific research as to why the blood glucose level stayed more stable?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would have the same guesses that you have. The muscular contraction pump there, slight increase in metabolic demand, and you're probably going to fidget and move just a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I would say that my guess would be the same as yours.
Yeah. No, it's interesting just that alone though. So just getting up, moving your body a little bit more. Last topic I really was interested in hearing your thoughts on was mitochondrial health as we age. So a lot of people listen to the show, they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond, interested in saying, well, okay, mitochondria is great for energy, but what about in terms of health, diet, exercise, like all the things that we need? And what are some of your tips in that specific area?
2 things. Yes, it's pretty true that the mitochondria had a significant impact on overall health and wellness. And what I'd say though is it's not that different from everything else. So it tends to be something we like to focus on research-wise because it's pretty easy to get a hold of, like scientifically, right? So and we know that it has such a profound impact. I mean, it is metabolism basically, right? The majority of metabolism we're going through is aerobic. And if it's aerobic, that means it has to go through mitochondria. And so it's easy for us to access research-wise. It's fairly big. We have a lot of ways to measure it. We can actually image it directly. And we've done that in my lab. So we can take actual pictures of it. We can see what part of the muscle cell it's in, where it's at. So for those reasons, it's a pet of research. But honestly, I don't distinguish optimizing mitochondrial health as like a strategy that we need to take for optimizing overall health. I think that it is simply a proxy. Like, you need to improve overall exercise health. If you do that, I promise you will improve mitochondrial health. But I don't think we should be targeting mitochondrial health. We should be targeting health. Mm-hmm. And the mitochondria will come from that, because if your mitochondria are dysfunctional, you probably have dysfunctional blood regulation in general. You probably have poor blood flow. You probably have poor oxygenation. You probably have poor metabolic health. And so I'm not really sure if the mitochondria is cause versus correlation here. Is it driving a lot of things, or is it just there because everything else is poor? So the exercise prescription I gave you earlier, in my opinion, is exactly how you handle it. And that's why I differentiated those energy systems. So yes, sustained effort is very important for overall mitochondrial function. And we see both the number and the size of the mitochondria improve pretty rapidly with consistent exercise training. And by that, I mean like that cardio, that steady state stuff. Mm-hmm. We see also it responds to the interval-based training. And so in my opinion, if you want to optimize that, you need to do both. Yes. Same thing. We see that if you challenge the muscle directly, we have both systemic and local adaptation. So local being the actual exercising muscles, say your hamstrings or your quad. But we also have systemic, meaning everyone in your system. So we need to do things besides, I lift with my upper body and then I run for my legs. Mm-hmm. Okay, better than nothing, but you need to do conditioning for your upper body as well, because you're not doing cardio for your upper body, and you need to do the lifting for your legs, because those will give you a more well-rounded mitochondrial adaptation. It will give you more well-rounded metabolic adaptation. So I think if you want to drive overall human resiliency, because most of us, and I think most people listening, well at home, seem to have, in general, the same kind of goals that I have, which is you want to be able to do what you want to do. I don't want any restrictions. So if I want to go in the mountains and hike for 3 hours, whether I'm hunting or just out with a family, I want to be able to do that in 80-degree weather and -10. Yeah. And I want to be tired at the end and have a great time, but I don't want to have to think I'm not going to make it up that mountain, right? I want to be able to have energy and not feel lethargic all day. I don't want to be overweight. I want to feel strong. I want to look good. I have the same general goals as most of the rest of you, and I want to keep crushing until I'm 90 plus. I don't want to be broken and damaged when I'm 60. So the things that I laid out earlier are, in my opinion, that's how you get to those levels. And that would, if you do that, your mitochondria should be just fine. I don't think you need to go out of your way to take specific mitochondrial boosting supplements. I'm not convinced on the effectiveness or necessity of those at all. I don't think we need to have specific eating routines that optimize that, mostly because I'm not convinced we know that one exists. And I don't think that any of those are, in fact, I think all of those pale in comparison to the effectiveness of basic exercise. Mm-hmm. So if you do that, I think you're going to vastly drown out any adaptation you could get from taking a real specific peptide or precursor or some sort of IV infusion. Not to say you could never do that stuff, but to me, those are not the long-term sustained answers. Those are short-term, wow, I felt great for 3 or 4, 7 days. But you didn't really solve problems. I just always said towards lifestyle intervention over drugs. So
no, and I would agree with that. I would say those are icing on the cake. And the reason why I would go back to that is when I had Addisons disease, I could take all the L-carnitine and everything else that I wanted. It wasn't bringing my mitochondria back to life. But what eventually did was being able to fix those underlying imbalances, and much of that through healing my gut, but also just baby steps. And like I had myalgic encephalitis, so just baby steps with the hermetic stressors, because I had to make that mitochondrial biogenesis. Like I had to actually recreate them. And a lot of that was through just getting my body to adapt to a little bit more stress. And by doing that, you'll be able to create more mitochondria to a degree. And I think that there is some fall off as we age. And I hope that maybe in the future we have some normal interventions that can just help us in a lot of our lifestyle-based things, such as diet and exercise, because every time they find this smart drug, so-called smart drug or medication, it always backfires. I mean, like, that's the truth, because your body, when you put something into it, there's always a cause and effect. So, okay, well, what else did it affect? Such as metformin. People were going over the moon a few years back on metformin, like, oh, well, actually, no, now we are losing muscle when we take metformin and exercise that day. So yeah, I think it goes back to the foundation of diet, exercise, stress reduction, really doing those things to get the body moving. And just one other note too, that, again, like why I always keep my mind open. I mean, I was very young at the time, but in the early 2000s, I just dismissed cardio, like steady state cardio. I just said, no. You know, the reason is, like, I'm helping people transform their bodies, and I can get them aerobically better through intervals. I can get them stronger, faster through, you know, weight training, plyos, et cetera. And the truth is, I had no need for it because people weren't looking for that. But when you look and you study telomeres and telomerase and all the, like, how your kidneys work, oxygen is a really good thing. And being able to do aerobic cardio is important. When I myself couldn't run a mile, I said, something's wrong here. Like, I need to fix this.
Yeah, I agree. Like, as I was shaking my head, if you're just listening at home the whole time, see if you're going on about that. I mean, I made the same mistake, and I've made a concerted effort over the last, I don't know, 7 or more years. It's like, this needs to be for the same thing. I think actually the number should be 5 miles. I think you should be able to run 5 miles.
Yeah.
You know, if you're overweight or it's been 20 years since you worked out, like, start at 400 meters, right? And work yourself up. But I think the goal should be, unless you've got a broken ankle or something, you should be able to all jog for 5 miles. I don't think that's that crazy. If you want to make your goal 3 miles, I don't care. There's nothing magical about 5.
I just say 30 minutes, like what you alluded back to. Like, you should be able to sustain your body. You should be able to run for 30 minutes. If it's 3 miles, great. If it's 5, you know, fantastic. But that's what I say. Like, you need to be able to run for 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's even higher. Like, I think the goal should be 45. I think it should be an hour. You should be able to run for an hour. That's not that hard physiologically. Right now, again, it's like, whew, that's tough. But physiologically, it's not that demanding. It's not climbing Everest right here. Right. It's not a goal that was just like, you know, if you said that 100 years ago, probably be like, yeah, of course, I can run for an hour. Like, what? How couldn't you? Like, can you just keep moving for an hour? So I think it is something where you need to move there. And it also, it just kind of reminds me of what I was saying earlier about sensitivity or resiliency. So you have to really pay attention to when you're taking something out or putting something in. Are you driving sensitivity? I mean, low back pain. Like, oh, every time I work out, I have low back pain. Maybe what you need to do to fix that is to train more, because your back isn't resilient at all. So any little stress, it feels freaked out, right? And we know so much about back pain being neurologically driven now rather than actually an actual insult. And then that, of course, goes much deeper than that. But that's just another example of saying, okay, let's take it to the limit of where it hurts. Let's do a little bit less than that. And let's see if we can do that. Come back tomorrow, not in pain, great. Let's do it the next day. And then we'll just build, and then we'll try to push that level of just below where it starts to hurt. And we'll eventually push that floor up until the ceiling is higher. And that's developing resiliency rather than saying, oh, I don't do squats. Why? Because my doctor said I shouldn't do it because I hurt my back in 98. All right, like, it's time. Like, let's go back. Right. And now your back is incredibly sensitive to everything. So every time you tie your shoe, you know, you feel like you've got a spasm. It's not, your back is probably not a bulging disc. You probably are just really, really, really sensitive that you need to push through that stuff. So.
Yeah, that is the truth. And the big takeaway here, at least what I heard, is that basically you work from your foundations 3 days a week, 4 days a week or so of exercise, trying to get into all your whole foods. And if you need to, every once in a while, you work on the fringe. Like, you can do things, whether it's you're working with athletes and you're helping them lose you're helping them lose 10, 20 pounds maybe in a day or two because of, you know, weight loss. Well, that's way out there in the fringe. But for your everyday individual looking to get healthier, be healthier, you really want to stick with foundational scientific principles. I mean, these are based over many thousands of years, and now we have the modern science to back that up.
Everyone thinks they're the unicorn.
Yes.
Everyone thinks, oh, I'm the special case that needs that. And I'm just telling you, you're not. you're most likely not. Everyone thinks they're the person that needs, you know, the next level gut testing, and everyone thinks they've got a gut problem. Maybe. Most likely not. Well, I shouldn't say most likely not. I'd say it's most likely getting these base principles of exercise and diet, hydration, and sleep, it fixes a lot of those problems. So even if you had something small going on, It's very rare that I've encountered where we actually need serious gut rebuilding. It's just as an example, right? Typically, we're able to fix a lot of symptoms and a lot of issues by saying, all right, like, let's pay attention to soluble and insoluble fiber. Where are we getting from? How much are we getting? Let's start there. Let's pay attention to overall calories. Let's pay attention to high quality foods. Let's pay attention to water. Okay, great. You do that, just almost every problem has gone away. And I have had a couple of cases. I worked with an actor, Brian Callen, and he was an example of this. We probably spent 3 months maybe, like tackling these very basics. And he was convinced, I have to eliminate nightshades, or I have to like all these standard, like I Googled, gut dysbiosis, and this is what it said. I'm like, I don't think that's the case, man. I don't think that, well, it turns out it was. It turns out actually, he actually had some, a particular bacterial overgrowth in his stomach. Once we got that killed, his psoriasis went away. And it's been probably 3 years and it's not come back. I mean, psoriasis is always there, but as long as we manage the stuff, it's like very little symptoms. When he was just plagued with stuff for months on end, and just getting worse and worse and worse. And we tried all the basic stuff, like, let's try stress management. Oh, like I'm telling you, he was filming a special. I'm like, man, this is just a stress issue. It wasn't. But he has been the exception in my entire career, where it was like, we spent 2 or 3 months on actually tightening up the basics, and that actually didn't fix. It actually helped a little bit, but the problem wasn't going away.
Sure.
And then we found actually there was actually an issue there, and it was pretty gnarly. So I've done a lot of other testing on people like that, though, that we jump straight to that. And you're like, no, man, like maybe this number is a little bit high, I guess, but like that's not driving all these symptoms. You're not that sensitive to, being a little small percentage points off. He was like way off, and it just jumped off the screen. We're like, oh, okay, great. But if your testosterone is 10% lower than average or something, like that's probably not why you feel like all day, every day.
Right.
Like those are not, like if it's 80% off now, we're going to have a conversation. But most people aren't that way. So you can save yourself a lot of money in testing and diagnostics by starting with, give yourself 12 weeks, like handle that big stuff. Give yourself 12 weeks and let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can be the unicorn. I always tell people that you can be that 1%, but first you need to see if that's true. Like, you need to prove it to yourself. Do the diet, do the exercise, the toxin removal, work on stress. And I always tell people, I have something called the de-stress protocol. And I tell people, with all of those things, you don't need to be perfect in any one. But if you're using multiple modalities, then you can be 80%, 90%, as you said. But if you're only focused on nutrition, it's going to be difficult to overcome everything through diet alone. Like, that's a really challenging thing with physical inactivity, with, making a lot of the wrong choices, sleeping in too late.
That's a good point, because we've shifted a lot of our focus onto just regulating breath. And we just found so many benefits in sleep quality, in sleep effectiveness, in training adaptations, in recovery, by just getting people to breathe properly. And so I actually spend a lot more time, so diagnostics are hydration, sleep, food, exercise, and now it's breath work. And I could argue that we're spending a lot of time starting with the breath stuff, because it does regulate things like energy. It regulates metabolic health. It regulates stress. If you do that stuff, it's amazed what a few minutes a day can do for all these, to so many areas. And so to me, that's one of those core principles where breath is a part of everything we do for everyone. It's not, you're a high carb person. You're a low oxygen person. Like, nope, we're all oxygen people. So we have found
yes, we are.
That is something we have really emphasized. And we found that in our lab to be pretty true as well for a couple of studies we've done. And I've certainly found it to be true in the practice with athletes and non-athletes, myself, other people, with one of the foundations that I'm a part of. We're actually going into a school. We're starting a study. We're going to do breathwork stuff in a school in Colorado for stress management stuff, with being online and all that stuff. And so I'm really excited about that. But yeah, like I said, another one of those things that actually it ticks off all the logic boxes. And the science is actually pretty strong as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I've been on the last couple of years a big kick on that. It's like, well, how can I, like you always want to take it to the next level. At least I do. And so I've really been looking a lot more into specific types of breath work. I've just had James Nestor on the show. I've had Patrick McKeown on the show. I actually work with Dr. Jay Wiles. He's one of the coaches I've been working on for HRV, because with heart rate variability, I mean, people wonder why someone can get no sleep and they can drink 3 drinks a night and they don't wear their seatbelt and they're always okay. It's like, well, minus the seatbelt part of it, it's like heart rate variability. I mean, if you have strong heart rate variability, your body is just so buffered to stress. And so when I had Addison's disease, I wish I could track it back then. It would have been in the single digits or teens. Like, there's just no doubt about it. And so when I look at it now, I'm like, okay, well, here I am now. Can I improve it? And now for me, it's like this challenge. And that's the thing, is like, you have to be able to look at these other things. And I found breath work was a game changer, and nasal breathing while doing cardio, for lack of a better term, was a big benefit for me in order just to learn to control my nervous system, my physiology. You don't need to breathe just through your nose, but for me to kind of get everything under control, to do steady state aerobic cardio was big.
Agreed. We've used that a lot for a lot of different things. I super agree.
Well, it's been, I could literally ask you questions all day. I want to be respectful of your time. It's been great having you on the show. What I'd like to do right now is, I know that you have a book, and actually this is with, is it Brian McKenzie? Is that the person you wrote it with, Unplugged book? I'd love to have him on the show. I've talked about him once before with James Nestor. He does a lot of interesting work with pH and breath work. And so be an interesting conversation in the future, but you wrote a book, Unplugged. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was Brian and I. And Brian, if you're unfamiliar with him, is a pretty well-respected, long-storied practitioner. He's a coach, so mostly in the endurance space. So he's coached a lot of world champions, Olympic gold medalists, et cetera, for over a decade, well over a decade now. And so we thought it'd be interesting to write a book from both the scientist's voice as well as the practitioner, to sort of see how these blends. And the general topic is exercise technologies. And so from his perspective, he saw these problems with athletes that are overusing training technologies, heart rate monitors, HRV, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And scientifically, I was feeling like we had the same issue. In general, we were also seeing people who were investing their resources, and by that I mean money, time, and expectations, into technologies that are either not serving them or actually potentially taking away from their practices. So examples would be, people go out and spend $600 to get a Fitbit so they can track their steps. And they're so focused on that number. Number one, you've wasted $600 because they're not necessarily even accurate measures. Number two, you should have hired a practitioner or a coach that can walk you through, well, how many steps are right for you? How should we do this? You don't move well, so you shouldn't just start running. If you haven't run in 20 years, you're going to get hurt. Your low back, whatever. It's an ineffective use of resources. The vast majority of people who use things like fitness trackers quit within 60 days. In fact, many of them buy again, even despite the fact that they quit. So now you're probably $300, $600, $900, $1,200 in, and it literally did nothing. We've actually seen in a number of clinical trials that fitness trackers can actually demotivate people because they're a daily reminder of how terrible you're doing, right? Like, hey, didn't get your 10,000. Hey, didn't get your 10,000. Hey, didn't get your 10,000. It's like this, I'm out. So for some people, there are problems. So the book is not anti-technology at all. It sounds like just a big whining fest. What we wanted to do is say, hey, look, here are the problems these things can cause, and then here are the solution to those problems. So if you want to use a tracker, here, avoid this, 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 and this, but make sure you do this, this, and this. So we want to make sure that they're serving you as best possible to help you get closer to your fitness training or goals, and not, you're just not falling prey to the exact same problems everyone else is having, because it's pretty predictable. I mean, pick your technology and I can tell you how it's going to fail. It's pretty easy. So that's what we wanted to help people manage, is how to use these fitness training technologies, or if you even need them to begin with. So it's often sounds like an anti-technology book, but it's really not. It's just, it's how to use these things appropriately.
Yeah, I think that's a a key thing. You do not want to demotivate yourself. And if you're doing 3,000 steps a day, like the average person, you don't need to set it at 10,000 next week, because it's like, completely changing your diet or completely going keto. You're probably going to want a carbohydrate again. Like, you might want to do that. You might want to have some fruit in the future.
If you want to save yourself the $20, I made a video on my YouTube, and I basically did like a 5-minute video of the entire book. So just go there if you want to get the gist. If you're still super excited, you can buy the damn thing, but most of you can get most of what you want out of that short little video.
Well, I'll link up both for sure. And then you also, on your YouTube channel, you have 5-minute, about 25-minute, and think about 55-minute physiology-based videos, or not just physiology, but having to do with movement, exercise, nutrition, you name it. So really nice resource. I'm going to link that up. And then also your podcast. Tell me a little bit about that, called The Body of Knowledge.
Yeah, so that's a bit different. We did 3 seasons. I'm not sure if I'll come back for a 4th, but we typically release like a season per year, and it's 6 to 8 or so episodes, and it's very topical and story driven. So it's not a typical like interview a guest, kind of do these things. So it's myself, my co-host Kenny Kane is a long time health, fitness, exercise coach, as well as a former stand-up comedian. So that's like a professional, like big time headlining guy. So he's been around a long time. His parents are in the Hall of Fame for swimming, and so he just has an extensive different physical activity background. So same kind of idea of blending the practitioner with the science, as well as his comic relief. And so we took it from different topics. Season 1 was about change. Season 2 was really about the Sherpa, people that guide you through change and then guide you back down. And then, so you can check those out if you want. So that, again, it's a little bit different. It's storytelling. Typically the episodes kind of weave together rather than just a bunch of one-offs. So, we cover some deep science stuff. We cover some high level stuff. It's a little bit different. So
that sounds great. I'll definitely link that up as well. And where can people connect with you on social media?
Twitter and Instagram are the best places. If you want the videos, like I said, YouTube is easier to place that stuff. So if you want to learn more about like what carbohydrates actually are, what's a simple breakdown. If you want to learn, hey, like how many reps and sets do I do if I want to get strength, or how many reps and sets do I want to do if I want to grow muscle versus speed, all that. But basically, honestly, I teach senior and graduate level classes in sports nutrition, program design, muscle physiology, strength conditioning. And all of that course material is in those YouTube videos free. So you could basically take all those classes with me for free in any chunks that you want to. I have an 1.5 hour long video on why you fart. That always tries a lot of views. It's basically my way to teach people about digestion, fiber, carbohydrate metabolism, like SIBO, all that stuff is wrapped up into, why raffinose makes you gassy, why, like all I ate was a bunch of sugar-free gum and I got super gassy.
Right.
It's all in that video. There's a 5-minute version of that, as well as like an 1.5 hour version. So if you want like the quick jab, you can get it. But if you're like, man, I want to learn about this because I'm a practitioner, or like I really want to work with people, then that's what those hour and a half long videos are for. Is I just put one out on muscle hypertrophy. So all the newest stuff we've done in the last couple of years about how muscle grows specifically. So that the area that they sort of range. Twitter is the best place to link like directly to studies if you're like that kind of cat and you want to see the link in the papers. But Instagram is also the more high profile place to go. So depending on what your flavor is.
That's excellent. I will definitely link all of those up. It was a pleasure chatting with you today. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge, and hopefully we can have you back on again in the future soon.
All right, man. It was a real pleasure.
Take care.
Yeah.